The personnel files slammed against the mahogany conference table with a sharp crack that echoed off the glass walls. Gavin Briggs stood at the head of the room, holding the folder like a prized trophy, a smug smile stretching across his face. Are we really paying this guy to look at codes? He let the words hang in the air, ensuring every single executive in the room heard him clearly. $950,000 a year to sit in a corner office and stare at spreadsheets, he added, his voice dripping with condescension. 12 pairs of eyes slowly turned toward me. I kept my hands flat on the table, my expression neutral. This was a public execution, and Gavin was enjoying every second of it. I have been here exactly 5 weeks, he continued, pacing the room like a prosecutor. 5 weeks, and I can already identify the massive inefficiencies bleeding this company dry. Senior Compliance Analyst, he said my title as if it were a punchline to a bad joke. This is a bloated legacy role that looks good on paper but delivers zero actual value to our bottom line. My name is Walter Vance. I spent 8 years at Apex Financial catching catastrophic mistakes that would have buried this company 3 times over. 8 years of reading boring contracts, finding hidden clauses that everyone else missed, and flagging deals that looked golden on the surface but were actually financial landmines. Gavin Briggs, who had been here barely long enough to learn where the executive bathroom was reducing my entire career to looking at codes. Walter here makes more than some of our department heads, Gavin said, warming to his audience of sycophants. Edward Miller, our chief financial officer, was watching carefully, his fingers tented. Helen Foster, my direct boss, looked like she wanted to slide under the table and disappear. And what is his output? Reports nobody reads, Gavin sneered. Emails about theoretical problems. Warnings about disasters that somehow never actually happen. Helen tried to cut in, defending my track record over the past 8 years, but Gavin waved her off like a pesky fly. I have reviewed the track record, he said. Lots of activity, lots of busy work. What I do not see is concrete return on investment. What I do not see is a single catastrophe he has actually prevented. Because those catastrophes he is always warning about, they never materialize. Maybe because they were never real in the first place. That was the moment I stopped caring about diplomacy. I had been up since 3 in the morning finishing my analysis of the Nexus Logistics acquisition. My son Toby Vance had been sick for 5 days with a high fever. My daughter Lily Vance needed help preparing for her big debate. My wife Rachel Vance was holding our family together, while I worked 16-hour days for this firm. And I was done being the quiet professional. Section 12, subsection 4 of the Nexus Logistics acquisition agreement, I said, my voice cutting through the room, steady and cold. The earnout structure directly contradicts the indemnification language in the appendix. If we close this deal tomorrow morning as planned, we are exposing ourselves to liability that could easily exceed $3 billion. Gavin laughed, a loud, theatrical sound. $3 billion, he repeated, looking around the room. Everyone hear that? $3 billion. Let me get this straight, Walter. You are telling me that our entire corporate legal team missed this massive problem, that the 3 external advisory firms we paid millions to review this deal missed it, that Nexus's own high-priced attorneys missed it. But you, sitting in your office with your highlighters and your spreadsheets, you found the smoking gun that nobody else could see. Yes, I replied, the single word landing like a heavy challenge in the center of the table. Gavin shook his head, smiling as if I were a child, insisting monsters lived under his bed. This is exactly the problem, Gavin said, turning to Edward Miller. Theoretical catastrophes, hypothetical scenarios built on assumptions and worst-case thinking. When does Nexus close? Edward glanced at me, then back at Gavin. Tomorrow morning at 8, and have their lawyers raised any red flags about the Section 12 issue? George, or rather Edward, shook his head. No, they have not. Right, because it is not actually a problem, Gavin declared. It is Walter finding patterns in the wallpaper because he needs to justify his massive salary. Gavin closed my personnel file with a decisive snap. Here is what is happening, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. Nexus closes tomorrow as planned. This deal has been 8 months in the making, and we are not blowing it up because of theoretical concerns from compliance. And Walter, you are taking some paid leave. 3 weeks, effective immediately. Rest up, Clear your head and think about whether this role is really the right fit for your talents. Paid leave. Everyone in the room knew what that meant. It was the standard corporate prelude to termination. First the forced leave, then the human resources meeting, then the performance improvement plan, and finally the exit package with a non-disclosure agreement. Helen Foster tried one last time to intervene, suggesting we delay to review my analysis, but Gavin was already packing his leather briefcase. Meeting is over, he said. We have a transformational acquisition closing in the morning. Let us stay focused on what actually moves this company forward. I walked out of that room knowing my career at Apex Financial was finished, that Gavin was going to close the Nexus deal, and that when it exploded, they would need someone to blame. I went back to my office and began preparing my defense. The next morning, I did not go into the office. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of black coffee, watching the clock. At 7:45 in the morning, I started refreshing my browser. At 8:22 in the morning, the official company announcement hit my inbox. Apex Financial is pleased to announce the successful closing of our acquisition of Nexus Logistics. The deal was officially done, and the countdown to disaster had begun. My wife Rachel Vance made breakfast in silence, sensing the tension. My son Toby Vance, still recovering from his illness, asked why I was not at work. My daughter Lily Vance wanted me to read her debate speech. I went through the motions of being a father, but my mind was busy calculating timelines. It would take at least 3 weeks for the integration team to start combining the financial systems. It would take another week before they attempted to reconcile the revenue reporting. The discrepancies would become undeniable within a month. I had time to prepare. By the second day of my forced leave, my decision was made. I called Helen Foster on her personal phone. I am resigning, Helen, I told her quietly. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Walter, please do not do anything rash, she urged. You are on paid leave. Just write it out and let me handle Gavin. No, I know the script, Helen, I said. Gavin will fire me and control the narrative. He will make it look like I was terminated for performance issues. This way, I leave on my own terms. When the Nexus deal blows up, my documentation will speak for itself. Helen sighed deeply. You are sure about this? I have never been more sure of anything, I replied. I drafted my resignation email that afternoon. It was brief, professional, and effective immediately. I sent it to the Human Resources Department, copying Helen Foster and Edward Miller. I deliberately did not copy Gavin Briggs, choosing to let him find out from someone else. The next step was protecting myself legally. I called an employment lawyer named Clara Brooks, who had been highly recommended by a former colleague. We connected at 4 in the afternoon. Tell me everything, Clara said, her voice calm and reassuring. I walked her through the entire Nexus acquisition, the conflicting contract clauses, the revenue discrepancies, Gavin's dismissive attitude, the forced leave, and my sudden resignation. Clara was quiet for 10 seconds after I finished. Do you have physical documentation of your warnings? She asked. Every single email, every analysis report, and every spreadsheet, all time-stamped, I replied. Gavin's response to my final warning was a 2-sentence email telling me the closing would proceed. I heard her exhale slowly. Walter, you just made the smartest decision of your career, Clara said. If this deal develops the way you predict, Apex Financial will be desperate to assign blame to protect their executive leadership. As a former employee with bulletproof documentation, you are insulated. More than that, you are extremely valuable. Forward me every single document you have. I spent the next 4 hours forwarding 31 separate files to Clara's secure server. Emails, meeting invites, PDF reports, and draft contracts. Clara called me back late that evening. This is pristine documentation, Walter, she said. You did your job perfectly. Now we wait for them to realize it. My wife Rachel was still anxious about the financial impact of my resignation. We needed the income, and losing my salary was a heavy blow. I know, Rachel, I told her quietly, holding her hand. But I could not sit there waiting for the axe to fall. The market is strong for experienced compliance analysts. I will find something else. In fact, I had already received messages from 3 different recruiters on my professional network. Rachel pulled me close. I trust your judgment, she whispered. I just do not want these corporate politicians to ruin your career. They cannot, I said, because I have the truth on my side. The first week of my resignation felt strange. I was suddenly available to attend Toby's afternoon debate practice. I took Lily to her doctor appointment without checking my phone every 5 minutes. I cooked dinner for the family every night. Rachel said I looked lighter, less stressed than I had in years. But underneath the calm exterior, I was waiting for the inevitable phone call. I knew the numbers, and the numbers never lied. The financial foundation of Nexus Logistics was built on sand, and the tide was coming in. Helen Foster called me on day 10. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Better than expected," I said. "Actually spending time with my family." "How is the office?" "Tense," Helen admitted. "Gavin is on a rampage with new efficiency initiatives, cutting costs and eliminating 3 more senior roles. He has not mentioned your resignation once. It is like you never existed. It stung a little, but I knew it was temporary." The bomb was ticking, and Gavin was sitting right on top of it. On the Saturday that marked exactly 3 weeks since the Nexus Logistics acquisition closed, my phone rang at 8 in the morning. The caller identification showed Helen Foster. I walked out of the kitchen, where Rachel was making pancakes with Toby and Lily, and answered the call. "Walter, oh my God, you were right," Helen said, her voice shaking so violently I could barely understand her frantic words. "You were completely right about everything." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice level. "Calm down, Helen. Tell me exactly what happened." "Nexus's first quarterly financial reports under our ownership came in yesterday afternoon," she explained. "The revenue recognition issue you flagged is catastrophic. They have been systematically misclassifying their contract revenue for 24 months. One-time project fees were categorized as recurring subscription revenue. Implementation charges were listed as ongoing monthly service fees. When our corporate finance team applied standard accounting principles for the integration, the numbers collapsed. We are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue that simply does not exist." The forensic accounting team that Helen had assigned to the preliminary integration work had run into a brick wall. When they requested the customer contracts from Nexus to verify the recurring subscription figures, they discovered that over 70 corporate accounts had been billed for one-time installation fees that were spread out over a 5-year period on the books. This accounting trick artificially inflated their annual recurring revenue by over 40%. The entire growth narrative was a total fabrication. The earnout structure, which promised the sellers $500 million over 4 years, had been designed to trigger based on these inflated metrics. When our team implemented standard accounting principles, the revenue figures plummeted, which disqualified the sellers from receiving their earnout. The sellers then claimed that our integration team had intentionally disrupted their operations to suppress the numbers. I sat down on the bottom step of the stairs, my legs feeling suddenly weak. "What about the earnout clause?" I asked. Helen dropped her voice to a tense whisper. "Their attorneys sent a formal demand letter to our general counsel this morning. They are claiming that Apex Financial deliberately interfered with their operations during the integration process, which caused the revenue discrepancies to surface and destroyed their earnout value. They are citing the exact indemnification language you warned about in Section 12, subsection 4. Walter, they are demanding $3.2 billion in damages. The exact number I had calculated. The exact nightmare scenario I had predicted in that crowded conference room, while Gavin Briggs laughed at my salary." "Where is Gavin right now?" I asked. "The emergency board meeting started at 5 in the morning," Helen replied. "Edward Miller is in there, along with Stephen Webb and our outside counsel. Everyone is panicking, trying to figure out how this happened." "Has my name come up?" I asked. Helen hesitated. "Edward Miller asked if anyone had raised concerns before closing. Gavin tried to downplay it, saying you always found theoretical problems. But Edward pushed back. He remembered your final email. He demanded to see the documentation. The board meeting was a bloodbath." Edward Miller lost his temper when Gavin tried to blame compliance for not filing a formal objection report. Edward pulled up his phone and read my final email aloud to the board. The email was sent exactly 24 hours before closing, warning that the combination of Section 12 and the earnout appendix created an unacceptable risk of a $3 billion lawsuit. The board members were furious. They demanded to know why my warnings were ignored by the chief operating officer. Gavin tried to argue that the external advisory firms had approved the transaction, but Stephen Webb pointed out that none of those firms had been asked to evaluate the conflict between the earnout triggers and the indemnification language. There is plenty of documentation, Helen, I said. I know, Walter. Gavin is trying to spin this to save his own skin. He wants to make it look like your warnings were vague and incomplete. The board is asking hard questions about why this deal was allowed to close. Gavin is under immense pressure. You need to be ready. I have a lawyer, Helen, I told her calmly. Good, she said. Do not talk to anyone from Apex Financial without her present. Do not respond to emails and do not take calls. They are going to come after you. I called Clara Brooks immediately after hanging up. She answered on the second ring, despite it being Saturday morning. It happened, I told Clara immediately. The Nexus deal blew up. They are facing a claim for $3,200,000,000. Clara did not sound surprised. Send me any communications you receive from them, she instructed. Do not respond to anything. Let me handle them. By Monday morning, my inbox was flooded with urgent messages from Edward Miller, Stephen Webb, and even Gavin Briggs. I forwarded them to Clara and remained silent. On Tuesday afternoon, Clara called. Apex Financial wants to bring you back as an independent consultant, she said. They realize they have no defense without you, because you know the deal structure better than anyone. They need you to walk their legal team through your analysis to defend against the lawsuit. The irony was beautiful. 3 weeks ago, Gavin was mocking my salary. Now they were begging for my help. Clara continued, before you agree, we need written terms that protect you. We need full indemnification from any liability, a consulting rate of $15,000 per day, and a signed statement acknowledging that you identified these risks and were overruled by management. We are going to establish the truth, and they are going to pay for it. I walked back into the corporate offices of Apex Financial on a Tuesday morning, exactly 4 weeks after Gavin Briggs had stood at the head of the conference table and ridiculed my salary. The atmosphere in the building was completely different. The usual bustling energy was replaced by a quiet, suffocating fear. The employees looked tense, and people were speaking in hushed whispers. Stephen Webb, the general counsel, met me in the lobby personally, offering a tight, nervous smile. Walter, thank you for agreeing to help us, he said, shaking my hand. Where do we start? Conference room A, I replied, my voice steady. We need the full deal team assembled, along with your outside counsel. The conference room was packed when we entered. Edward Miller looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. Helen Foster gave me a small, grateful nod. 3 outside lawyers in expensive suits sat with legal pads open. Gavin Briggs sat at the far end of the table, staring intently at his notepad, refusing to look up as I walked in. Walking back through those doors felt like stepping onto a battlefield. The guards greeted me with respect, but the executive floor was silent as a tomb. Nobody was talking near the coffee machine, and the assistants were typing with their heads down. Stephen Webb met me near the elevator, looking exhausted, his tie slightly askew. He thanked me for coming, but his eyes were darting around nervously. The arrogance that defined the C-suite had evaporated, replaced by the realization that their careers were hanging by a thread. Stephen Webb opened the meeting. Nexus Logistics is alleging that Apex Financial deliberately interfered with their operations, causing their earnout metrics to fail, Stephen said. They are claiming $3,200,000,000 in damages. We have 90 days to file our response. He gestured toward me. Walter Vance identified significant issues with the earnout structure and indemnification language prior to closing. We need to understand exactly what he found and how that was escalated. Every eye in the room turned to me as I projected my analysis. I will start with the complete timeline, I said. For the next 3 hours, I walked them through the deal with surgical precision. I showed them the initial contract review, where I had first flagged the problematic language in Section 12. I presented the deep dive into Nexus's historical financial filings that revealed the systemic inconsistencies in their revenue recognition. The presentation was a masterclass. I projected the evidence showing how the earnout triggers in the contract were mathematically tied to revenue figures that were legally disputable. I walked the outside lawyers through Section 12, subsection 4, demonstrating how the indemnification clause allowed the sellers to claim that any change in management or accounting systems constituted active interference. By forcing standard compliance measures, Apex had inadvertently triggered the seller's right to sue for the full value of the earnout. The outside counsel, led by Audrey Clayton, listened in silence, taking pages of notes. Gavin Briggs sat at the end of the table, his arms crossed tightly, looking at the floor as the evidence of his incompetence was displayed. I displayed the 3 separate emails I had sent to the deal team, the formal risk assessment presentation I had delivered 4 weeks before closing, and finally, my last comprehensive email sent 24 hours before the deal closed. One of the outside lawyers, a sharp-eyed woman named Audrey Clayton, stopped me. "This final email you sent the day before closing," she said. "Who received it and who responded?" "I sent it to Edward Miller, with copies to Gavin Briggs, Helen Foster, and Stephen Webb," I replied. Gavin Briggs responded. Audrey Clayton turned her gaze to Gavin. "Mr. Briggs, what was the nature of your response?" Gavin's voice was flat, stripped of the arrogance he had displayed weeks earlier. "I acknowledged receipt of Walter's concerns and made the executive determination that closing should proceed as scheduled," he said. "On what basis did you make that determination?" Audrey pressed, the silence in the room stretching tight. "Did you consult with outside legal counsel about the specific issues Walter raised? Did you conduct any supplementary due diligence?" "No," Gavin admitted, his jaw tightening. "I relied on the work product of the advisory firms who had already reviewed the deal." Audrey Clayton made a slow, careful note on her pad. "Did you specifically ask any of those firms to review the language conflict Walter identified?" she asked. "No, I did not," Gavin whispered. "I made a judgment call that the concerns were theoretical and that delaying the closing was not warranted." Audrey turned back to me. "Walter, in your professional opinion, based on your 8 years of compliance experience, was this risk readily discoverable during standard due diligence?" I looked directly at Gavin, but he still refused to meet my eyes. "Yes," I said. "It required detailed cross-referencing of contract language with actual revenue reporting, but it was easily discoverable." The meeting continued, but the critical narrative was now established in writing. I had done my job. The decision to ignore the warning and proceed with the closing sat entirely with Gavin Briggs. Following that initial meeting, I spent 12 weeks locked in a secure office with Audrey Clayton and a team of forensic accountants. We reviewed thousands of sales transactions and customer emails from the past 2 years of Nexus's operations. We found that the sellers had systematically fabricated their subscription growth by billing customers for services they never requested, then reversing the charges as project fees. This was clear, indisputable fraud. Under Section 10B of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 and Federal Rule 10b-5, this level of misrepresentation voided their claims. Armed with this evidence, Audrey Clayton was able to construct a counterclaim that would completely destroy the seller's legal position. Armed with the forensic analysis I compiled, Audrey Clayton and the legal team went on the offensive. Apex Financial filed a massive counterclaim against the former owners of Nexus Logistics for fraudulent inducement and breach of contract. The evidence was undeniable. Faced with the reality of their own financial fraud being exposed in open court, Nexus's legal counsel immediately requested a private settlement conference. The settlement negotiations were brief once we presented the forensic evidence. When the sellers realized we had documented proof of their systematic accounting fraud, they knew that proceeding to trial would result in federal criminal indictments for securities fraud. Their lawyers immediately advised them to drop their $3 billion claim. In the end, Apex settled for a restructured deal where the earnout was tied to actual, audited revenue, reducing their payout to a fraction of the original agreement. Apex was saved, and Gavin Briggs quietly resigned from the firm in May, his reputation in the industry ruined. Shortly after the settlement was finalized, Stephen Webb met with me in his office. He offered me a permanent position as the Senior Vice President of Risk Management and Compliance, with a base salary of $1,500,000 and a direct reporting line to the Board of Directors. It was the ultimate professional validation, but I politely declined the offer. I had already accepted a position elsewhere. Back in March, I had been approached by Catalyst Partners, a boutique consulting firm specializing in acquisition risk assessment. They wanted me to build and lead a team doing exactly what I had done for Apex Financial, but for multiple corporate clients across various industries on my own terms. The base salary was $1,100,000, but the equity stake was substantial, and the partnership track was clear. More importantly, I would never again have to sit in a room where an arrogant executive like Gavin Briggs dismissed my expertise as theoretical concerns. My final day as a consultant for Apex Financial was a warm Friday in late May. Helen Foster took me out for a celebratory lunch. "We are going to miss you tremendously, Walter," she said, raising her glass. "You saved this firm." "I was just doing the job I was hired to do, Helen," I replied. "You could always join me at Catalyst. We are expanding quickly." Helen smiled but shook her head. "Maybe in a year or two," she said. "Let's see how the new leadership shapes things here first." That night, Rachel and I celebrated at home with Toby and Lily. Toby was excited about his debate victory and Lily was proud of her science project. Looking at my family, I knew that walking away from Apex had been the right decision. I had protected my integrity, my family's future, and my career. But that anger became useful motivation for my new role at Catalyst Partners. It reminded me exactly why compliance and risk assessment matter. Someone has to be the person in the conference room, willing to say stop and force people to look at the facts. Someone has to read the fine print that everyone else finds boring. Someone has to run the numbers that seem tedious until they prevent a catastrophe. And when that person gets laughed at, dismissed, or pushed out, they must be strong enough and prepared enough to stand by their work. 8 months later, Edward Miller sent me a short message on my professional account. "I should have backed you up in that meeting," he wrote. "I am genuinely sorry." I wrote back, telling him that he listened when it counted by demanding the documentation, and that was what mattered. It cost Apex Financial a massive lawsuit to prove I was right, but my professional integrity was worth the fight. The morning after I had submitted my resignation, Rachel had asked me if I was sure about walking away from the salary and security. I told her I was protecting something far more valuable: my integrity, my expertise, and my right to be heard. Those things cannot be bought. Now, looking back, I had kept every promise to myself. I had protected my integrity, documented every warning, and transitioned to a firm where my expertise was valued from day one. Gavin Briggs learned a very expensive lesson about the danger of dismissing compliance. I took great satisfaction in knowing my analysis was vindicated. Sometimes, being right is not enough. You must be brave enough to speak out, document everything, and protect yourself. I would do it all over again because that is what true professionalism demands. That is the story of how a $950,000 salary almost cost a company $3 billion because a new manager could not tell the difference between looking at codes and preventing corporate catastrophes.